to use it.
Oh, it's pretty simple. You just sign in.
Inshallah, later on I'll ask.
All right, everybody. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, today, inshallah, we're going to be continuing with Tafsir Surah Al-An'am. And certainly, we're still doing Tafsir al-Qurtubi. And we are on ayat 9 and 10 and 11. So, let's really quick just go over what we were doing. وَقَالُوا لَوْلَا أُنزِلَ. Let's see, where is that ayah? Here to go. لولا أنزل عليه ملك ولو أنزلنا ملكا لقضي الأمر ثم لا ينظرون. And they said, and of course, do you remember the Surah Al-An'am is pretty much the surah that displays the belief that the disbelievers had at the time. So they basically came in with a suggestion and they said, well, why isn't it an angel that we're getting? And it said, وَلَوْ أَنزَلْنَا مَلَكًا لَقُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ. If this was an angel that was sent, لَقُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ. Let's just see what Tafsir al-Qurtubi says in regards to this ayah. So that was right there, that suggestion. And when you say lawla, now the word lawla right there actually means somewhat of trying to suggest, trying to put forward, trying a wishful thinking, let's say it that way. So this is basically that lawla, meaning that wishful thinking or putting in an assumption or putting in a suggestion right there. And certainly Ibn Abbas had said if they had seen the angel, then they would have actually fallen dead. Well, why would they fall dead if they had seen an angel? Because out of fear or out of just this lack of expecting anything that might appear in that way, it would be extremely scary because this isn't something that you're used to seeing. It's exactly like when we would see people pranked that there's a ghost or that there's something extraordinary, and that's when they could go in complete shock or probably have a heart attack or anything like that. So that's what he was talking about, that it would be something so magnificent that they might actually get a heart attack and die. Now, of course, for Ibn Abbas, they didn't know how to explain, and they didn't know how to explain, well, why do people die when they get into a magnificent shock? All right, so they didn't know a heart attack is involved, or perhaps, a blood pressure going up, etc., and then therefore affecting their body. So they just know that when people go in magnificent shocks that they die. What happens to them and all of that dynamic, they don't really know. And certainly said, إِذْ لَا يُطِيقُونَ رُؤْيَتَهُ, because they would not be capable of handling seeing this creature that is an angel, that is extraordinary, and certainly something that is beyond their ability to analyze, beyond their ability to see, because as human beings, we were given certain potentials to see, to understand, to comprehend certain things in matter. And since angels are beyond matter, then it's going to be something that is too much for the brain to comprehend, and certainly too much for us to at all, or at least in any form, understand what this is. Okay, let's see. Al-Hasan and Qatada, they had a different interpretation. They said لأهلكوا بعذاب الاستئصال لأن الله أجرى سنته بأن من طلب آية فأظهرت له فلم يؤمن أهلكه الله في الحال. Al-Hasan and Qatada, they explained this in a different way. They said if they would have received and gotten basically the miracle that they had asked for, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have punished them if they had still rejected, if they had gotten or received the miracle and still insisted on not believing or rejecting. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He basically had set a law. If you had seen the miracle and you still insist to reject, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would punish that person. And they said, well, that's why the ayah said, ثُمَّ لَا يُنظَرُونَ. لا ينظرون is not that they will not say. لا ينظرون means that they would not be given any further procrastination, any further, let's say, timing to give them a second chance. Why? لا ينظرون, in other words, they would not be awaited. They would not be awaited, but they would be held accountable on the spot. Because if this is a miracle, you see the miracle, and you still insist that you are not believing, then if right now, while you are witnessing the miracle, you did not believe, then when, of course, time goes by, well, that doesn't mean that you're going to be believing when the miracle is all gone right before your eyes. But then certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically saying right there that they would not be waited, given time, or even awaited. وَلَوْ جَعَلْنَاهُ مَلَكًا لَجَعَلْنَاهُ رَجُلًا. If we had made the angel, if we had made, of course, the angel be a man, that is a man human messenger, then they would not be capable of seeing that this man is actually an angel, and therefore they would not be capable of somehow understanding that no, that what you are actually seeing is an angel. Because if they're going to be insisting on disbelief, well, they're just going to say, well, all we see is a human being. Where's the angel in this? Okay. So in other words, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to infer is that when it comes to disbelief, some people, they just don't want to believe. So they will continue to procrastinate. They will continue to look for different narratives, for different ways to bend the truth and not necessarily see the truth, because they would expect that if we were to bend the truth, that everything would basically be going in our way. And therefore, لَلَبَسْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ مَا يَلْبِسُونَ. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have made the angel be in a shape of a human being, or even the opposite way, then of course that's not making things becoming clearer, but that would actually add on to the confusion and not make things in any shape or form in better clarification. So لَلَبَسْنَا. What is لَبَسَ? لَبِسَ or لَبَسَ basically means to cover. It means to cover, it means to wear, it means to, of course, wear something in terms of clothing. So when we say لَلَبَسْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ, that would mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if things were looking confusing, if we basically had a number of different things on top of one another, that would basically put on a covering over the reality of things, and then they would not be capable of seeing the truth of the matter. So just putting that's what a lebs is. In other words, in this context, it's not necessarily coming from a garment, but it's actually coming in from the standpoint that it would add on to the murkiness or probably the confusion. They would not be capable of identifying whether this is an angel, whether this is a human being, or whether the message was basically fit for them as human beings to apply and how we understand it. Okay, so this is لَلَبَسْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ مَا يَلْبِسُونَ. Is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically make things more confusing? No, it's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would make things more confusing. It's that if he were to apply what they had requested, which is send the prophet or the messenger in a shape of an angel, that's when things would be confusing and not the other way around. Okay, so that's what لَلَبَسْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ مَا يَلْبِسُونَ. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wanting to make the matters clear for you and not something that is hard for you to recognize and basically see. وَلَقَدْ اسْتُهْزِئَ بِرُسُلٍ مِّن قَبْلِكَ. And many prophets were basically mocked from before you. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically, as a result of what they had done, which is mocking the prophets, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala حَاقَ بِهِمْ. حَاقَ بِهِمْ means that basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent down a punishment. And that's very similar to the ayah, وَلَا يَحِيقُ الْمَكْرُ السَّيِّئُ إِلَّا بِأَهْلِهِ. What is وَلَا يَحِيقُ الْمَكْرُ السَّيِّئُ? Any type of an evil plot, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will let that come back to the person simply because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world in a certain paradigm, in a certain pattern, and therefore you cannot escape this pattern because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically control all the different things in nature, all the different things in this world, whether social relations or the social dynamic or whether the financial, economical, whatever you may call it, everything basically goes in a certain pattern. If the person had chosen to go outside of the pattern, it will basically snap at them and there's no running away, basically. There is no running away. ما كانوا أي حاق بهم عاقبة استهزائهم. Okay, so this is to basically be a comprehensive word, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically right there. Let's see it. Let's see the word وَلَقَدْ اسْتُهْزِئَ بِرُسُلٍ مِّن قَبْلِكَ. By the way, I want to look at the word وَلَقَدْ. The word قَدْ is different than لَقَدْ. Okay, so لَقَدْ is an affirmation. قَدْ is going to depend on whether the verb that is after it, whether it is a past tense or whether it is a future tense. قد يستهزئ is more skeptical. Skeptical is a skeptical tense, but قد استهزئ is an affirmation. So if we are to look at the word قد, it is different than لقد. لقد is an affirmation. قد, if we were to take out the lam right there, and if we said قد استهزئ برسل من قبلك, that basically قد استهزئ is to confirm that it was something that had happened. But if the verb that is after the word قد, not the لقد, but the قد, that would actually mean, if it's in the past tense, that is the verb after it, it would mean that this is doubting that that happened at all. So قد يستهزئ, it might happen, okay? But this is basically here giving an affirmation that لقد استهزئ. There's no doubt, for sure, there are many prophets that were mocked, that were ridiculed, and certainly whether we're speaking about the message itself or whether we're speaking about the prophets themselves or whether we're speaking about all the details of what was sent onto them or even the method. So they will use different tactics to basically absorb and demolish any type of confidence the person might have, whether it's cornering them with questions or using the ad hominem and attack the person himself, whether attacking their intention or probably attacking their garment or probably attacking them in different ways to basically demolish the person's confidence and certainly to deter them from continuing the da'wah that they're doing. Okay, so of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell us the stories of the prophets in order to tell us this is how the story of Tawheed, the story of the message, the legacy of the prophets started, and therefore they will basically continue. And the story is pretty much the same. You will see mockery, you will see ad hominem, attacking the person and not refuting the argument. You will see ways to threaten you. They will change and alternate the different methods that they will use in order to deter you from basically deter you from doing what is right, or even deter you from continuing to deliver the message. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells, well, that's how the story that's how the story began. How do you continue the story? How do you do your form of da'wah? And how do you stay strong? Do you take the inspiration from ulil azmi min ar-rusul, the mightiest prophets, and do you take the story and the legacy and the inspiration from these prophets, or are you going to weaken? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically tell us those paradigms, those stories, how they basically responded in order for us to recognize that certainly some details were not mentioned. What type of mockery happened? How did they react? What kind of reaction did the prophets have, etc.? All of those were basically mentioned in some, let's call it, some ambiguity, but it was letting us know the different examples, and that's why he said birusulin. He didn't really say which prophets. He said, well, previous prophets were also mocked. Did he say which prophets? No, he didn't. In other ayat, it does say how Prophet Nuh was mocked, and how they were putting their garments over their heads, استغشوا ثيابهم وأصروا واستكبروا استكبارا, and how they were basically making fun of him when he was building that ark, and all of that. So that was something that we already know was happening, and we already know that different prophets went through different situations, but then that's in order. And sometimes the names are not mentioned because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted you to recognize that despite the name not being mentioned, it doesn't matter what the name was, who the person was. That's why he would say, جاء رجل من أقصى المدينة يسعى. Did he really say who the name was? No, he didn't. And it's really interesting. You would see throughout history, there were many influential figures that we don't really know their names. We don't really know who that person was. We just know that this person had an impact. And some of those stories we would see, for example, can you hear the background noise? Oh dear. Can you hear the background noise? Any construction work? Can you hear it? Okay, we're going to continue despite, hopefully, inshallah, won't continue. So when you look at historically, one example, when you would see Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. I guess I have a special relationship with Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, maybe because of the time that I lived in al-Masjid al-Aqsa and saw the minaret of at least the one, that stands in its place right now, and not the actual one, because that one got burnt down in 1969. But there was a minaret that was designed during the time of Nuruddin Zinki. Now, it was said that the person that did the minaret, he was designing it, and at the time, Al-Masjid al-Aqsa was still under the Crusade occupation, basically. And people would go to this carpenter and say, well, what are you doing? You're just, trying to design the pulpit that when al-Masjid al-Aqsa is long gone. In other words, it's been under this occupation for almost 100 years now, under the Crusade occupation. So, you're just working really out of context. You're just rushing the matters, working out of context, and you're just wasting your energy. Well, he said, well, I'm just a carpenter. That's all I know how to do. I am not a fighter. I don't know how to do more than that. I'm just a carpenter and I'm going to design this minaret and it's going to be in al-Masjid al-Aqsa. How, when, I don't know. I just know how to make something that is be fit for al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And he would continue. They would still mock him, but they never thought that it was going to be faster than they had expected. And sure thing, the minaret did find its way in al-Masjid al-Aqsa and it was put in al-Masjid al-Aqsa. When you look at certain figures, just like, the story Ahmad ibn Hanbal, when Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he was basically under, I guess the influence of, well, maybe I could just dismiss myself and just say that Al-Quran was created, and I could just say, well, I was under this this physical torture and I couldn't handle it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive me because I am really tortured. But this person in the background, it was mentioned, was the main person that supported Ahmad ibn Hanbal when he was about to give a testimony that he doesn't believe in because the corporal punishment, the punishment that he was subject to was beyond his ability to cope any further. So he basically gave himself that fatwa. It's okay. You tried and you're under this torture. You have the permission, rukhsa, to say what you don't believe in because of the pressure and then move on, and you can probably change later on. But this man out of the crowd, which Ahmad ibn Hanbal describes that he was basically this Bedouin, an old man, he comes in and certainly the name was not mentioned. And he said, Ithbat, just be steadfast. Don't be afraid. Say the truth. Don't be afraid. Keep yourself grounded. And he said, when he said that, I got all that energy together, and that's the energy that put me together. And then I insisted that I'm going to stay strong despite all the pressure that I'm under. And I want you to look at this one. When you look at the ayat as well, جاء رجل من أقصى المدينة يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين. I want you to look at this one because in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and a man came from a farther away place, from a place that is far away. What was he doing? Yas'a. He was scurrying to basically make a testimony, to make an announcement. يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين. Follow the messengers, follow the prophets. What was he trying to do? Some people, they may not have the ilm, but they have the skill. Some people, they may not necessarily have the skill, the ilm, but they have the enthusiasm. I'm going to do whatever it takes. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put the blessings in whatever effort they would be doing, despite the fact that they probably lack the skill or probably lack the ilm, but because of their intention, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will let the legacy that they had tried to put forth and put forward basically be the main influence, the main change that would make history. And this is important to keep in mind. You don't necessarily have to have the ilm to make legacy. You don't have to have the skill to make legacy. You may probably have a potential to perhaps maybe, I don't know, design flyers, or probably clean up the masjid, or probably maybe make food. That's all you know how to do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, based on that potential that you have, and based on the intention that you're trying to put forth, the change, that's what matters. Remember that carpenter. He said, hey, that's all I know how to do. I'm just a carpenter. I don't know how to do much. I'll just design. Right there, I'll design a pulpit that would be in al-Masjid al-Aqsa. I don't know what else to do. And that was the legacy that he wanted to put that cornerstone. And I want you to look at a lot of the changes in the world. They don't necessarily have to be big in their numbers. They could actually be small in the number of it. But the legacy and the momentum it carries might actually be bigger than you would expect whatsoever. We usually think of strategies as coming in with magnificent preparation and all of that. Yes, certainly this is important, but what is even more important is having your intention in place, and then certainly putting in those efforts to make sure that the plan goes in its place. Okay, so when you look at the word birusul is not an identified naming. In other words, it's not an identified noun. That's in order to let the Prophet ﷺ know that numerous prophets had come in before you, and they too were mocked. In other words, the story is the same, so don't feel bad. The story is the same, and you're just basically following the footsteps of those that had come before you. And also, you are going to be facing the same type of pattern that the previous kuffar, the previous disbelievers, had basically reacted to the message. In other words, stay strong when you know that this is the only method that they would use, so don't fall for it. فحاق بالذين سخروا منهم, and here it is basically said, and ولا يحيق المكر السيء إلا بأهله, whether it's نزل to mean that it was sent, or whether it is to mean it surrounds. There's no running away. Remember, وَلَا يَحِقُ الْمَكْرُ السَّيِّئُ إِلَّا بِأَهْلِهِ. Every single plot that the person might actually put forth, it will surround that person. There is no running away, because the Lord Almighty had basically set the pattern in this universe. If a person puts in a bad intention, it will come back to them, and there's no running away. Whether we're speaking about economical plots that the person might be bringing in, they might think it's to basically set it up against someone else, but it will snap in their face. Every single plot that someone will be somehow putting in all the effort to snap in someone's face, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, actually, it's going to be snapping in your face. The evil that you would commit, it will snap in your face. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ ثُمَّ انظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. So here, you could see there is a little shift right there. It was speaking, استهزئ برسل من قبلك. The prophets before you, they were mocked, etc. But then it shifted from speaking about that more of an informative clause, talking about other prophets, to then shifting the place and giving me a direct clause right there, directly speaking to the people and telling them, okay, well, here's a fact. I'm directing now the words are directed at the disbelievers, or probably even the believers themselves. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, telling them, go and and walk and navigate on earth. ثم انظروا. I want you to look at the word ثم. Why did it use the word ثم? سيروا في الأرض ثم. Because while you're preparing to leave, while you're preparing to pack, while you're taking the time to probably navigate, it's probably not striking you at the time. But then ثم انظروا, just take the time to think about what you had navigated. Take the time to just sit and think about all the different things that you had seen. Think about the different experiences. Think about كيف كان عاقبة المكذبين. And think about how things started out, how their life started out, and then the efforts that they put in order to make their life basically be in success and head towards basically all the different stories that everybody lives. They start out in early childhood, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, let's actually go to that ayah, right? Let's see, let's just remember this page that we're on, 138, and we're just going to jump to Surah Al-Hadid really quick, okay? And in Surah Al-Hadid, am I going the right place? Yeah. In Surah Al-Hadid, let's look at this ayah right there. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, let's see. يا أيها الذين, is it in Surah Al-Hadid? Yeah, right there. اعلموا أنما الحياة الدنيا لعب ولهو وزينة وتفاخر بينكم وتكاثر في الأموال والأولاد كمثل غيث أعجب الكفار نباته ثم يهيج فتراه مصفرا ثم يكون حطاما وفي الآخرة عذاب شديد ومغفرة من الله ورضوان وما الحياة الدنيا إلا متاع الغرور. He said, and know that this life is nothing but mere play, then obsession with showing beauty and living in entertainment, or lahu is more entertainment. Zina, that's the obsession of trying to show attraction, trying to beautify oneself. تفاخر بينكم, and then it's boasting about every single person's pride and their what they were capable of achieving and all of that. And then the money is basically going more and more, with the children becoming more and more. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, this is similar to the rain that would basically amuse, whether it's the disbelievers or whether it's the farmers. And then they would see the greenery that is right before their eyes. And then this greenery starts going basically yellow. And just when they were so proud of all the greenery, they were proud of the amount, of the abundance of that, of those wheat or plantation that they have, then it becomes yellow, and then it becomes nothing but hay onto the ground. And on Judgment Day, it would basically be a severe torment. What is that supposed to be saying? And this is right there, giving us the whole theme of why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was giving us the chronology. In early childhood, it's playing time. It's learning through playing, but then once the person goes into the age of teenage, it's lahu. It's wanting to play games. It's wanting to perhaps get into different type of navigation, but not taking anything seriously. But when they go into puberty, then now it's zina. Now it's trying to show attraction. Male are trying to attract female. female, female trying to attract male, females trying to show that they're basically fitting the category of beauty, context, and whatever it is. That's zina. And once, of course, they get married, then they go into tafakhurun bainakum. I was capable of getting this job. I was capable of excelling in such and such business or whatever it is. I was capable of passing the credits and getting this and this achievement and all of that. That's tafakhurun bainakum. Why do they do tafakhur? Well, it's basically because we don't want to reveal our weaknesses. We want to be identified by our powers, by our potentials, by our successes, because that's the way that we create some kind of a haylaman, some kind of a power where we want to not only deceive ourselves and manipulate ourselves, but we want to manipulate others for basically for getting some kind of a social status, some social position, and we would, of course, build some kind of a social CV, and that's تفاخر بينكم, and manipulate others to let them think of us as successful, smart, beautiful, all of those different qualities in order to ensure that we would get more privileges and easier ways to basically enhance our achievements, enhance our powers, and probably enhance our social status. Then تكاثر في الأموال والأولاد. Then we use this type of boasting about our achievements and trying to create a CV. Then we use that as a way, تكاثر في الأموال والأولاد, to increase our wealth, increase our basically our family, and then كمثل غيث. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us see that simile. Whenever you would see this kaf right there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like, as such and such. Why giving us the comparison? In order to tell us, well, just exactly like you would see the greenery. The greenery would appear to the farmer that this is so beautiful and so magnificent. And to them, the greenery, they're seeing nothing but basically dollar signs, and they're just seeing that this is going to be money right there. But who knows what will happen, whether it's probably a flood destroying all that they had planted, or whether it basically just becomes the time for the harvest, and the time for harvest it becomes, yes, you would harvest it, and all the greenery that was there during the season of harvest is now all gone, and you have to put in the effort and start all over. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, well, that's the same way life is. Your body in the beginning, it's basically full of water, it's growing more and more water, and then your body starts drying out with time. Your money starts drying out with time. Your potential start drying out with time. Your brain starts drying out with time. You start forgetting things. You start losing momentum, potentials, weakness. Your body, your growth hormones are right now going out the window, and little by little, you're going weaker and weaker, and certainly the social status basically changes along with it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, وَمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا مَتَاعُ الْغُرُورِ. So therefore, recognize the thing that life is only a place that basically would appear in a certain image, but the truth of the matter, it does not give you its real image. It doesn't give you its real image, so you really got to be careful, because you may fall in this area where it basically is giving you the wrong image, and you're confusing your matters without you realizing. So when you see in Surah Al-An'am, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثُمَّ انظُرُوا, basically telling us, just take the time to see. Here's that thumma. take the time to think about it, take the time to explore it, take the time to see the patterns. كيف كان عاقبة المكذبين, in order to see كيف كان, and I want you to look at the word كيف, because the word كيف is actually talking about the pattern of something and how it goes from one stage to another, from one transition to another. So when it says ثم انظروا كيف كان عاقبة المكذبين, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to think over the process in how these people started out their life, how they probably made families, how they started out in early childhood, then went into teenage, then they got really strong, then they had kids, then they had grandkids, then they got weaker and weaker and lost their potentials and all the power that they had invested and everything. It became nothing but other people to make use of and not the person himself. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us or asking us to basically think of the chronology. How did things start out? Where did they end in? Well, in this situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to see how they started out in denial. How they started out in denial, then that denial basically took them to a certain aqiba. What is al-aqiba? Al-aqiba comes from the root aqiba. What is aqiba? Aqiba is really the heel. The heel that basically al-aqib is basically the heel on the heel in your foot. Okay, that's al-aqib. It's basically the heel at the back. Okay, it's what makes you basically grounded in a certain way, gives you the balance, and it's also at the back. Okay, so when you look at that, عاقبة المكذبين, in other words, العاقبة could mean that heel, and العاقبة could mean what later had come. What is the correlation between al-aqib and al-aqiba? Al-aqib is what pushes you forward. The heel, basically, it gives you that balance, pushes you forward. That's what you would use to walk. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us al-aqiba, what pushed them to take certain steps in their life. What were the steps that they had taken in life? And then finally coming to al-aqiba / the final decree. Okay, but I want you to trace the words in Lugha Arabiya in order to see what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asking me to do. So when he's telling us ثم انظروا كيف كان عاقبة المكذبين, he's like, then I want you to see. Is it to see to mean unzuru, to meaning with your own eyes? Or is unzuru can be a visual? It could also be a mental vision. A mental vision where you're seeing the patterns, you're navigating the patterns because you don't want to go into their aqiba. You don't want to take their footsteps. You don't want to get to their decree. You don't want to get into the final destination that they gotten into. Well, who? Al-Mukaththibin. Don't get into the footsteps of those that had lived in denial and then started facing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had promised them that they would face, whether it's death or whether it's a punishment. قُلْ لِمَن مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, and ask them who or to whom does the earth and the heavens belong to? Who is this in response to? So this is in response basically to those that would be asking questions about the prophets and the messengers and all of that. And that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, okay, you don't want to believe it? That's fair enough. Here's what I want you to do. I had given you the cosmological argument. I had given you theological argument. Now, if you prefer using your own sentiments, your own feelings, you want to see things on your own, where you could hands-on, fair enough. Go in hands-on and start navigating and seeing things before your eyes. If you want something that is more of an experimental experience, well, here's one homework for you to do. Go and explore the world. Go and see those different past civilizations. What actually resulted in the situation that they were in? What happened? I want you to study the past. And it's quite interesting. And there was Bernard Lewis. He actually, although one of the main, I would say, I would say, the war on terror and the war on Islam, I would say, his name is Bernard Lewis. Okay. And he said one thing and he's a professor, by the way. He lived a very long life. I don't know if he died, but lived a very long life. Right now, he's probably 90 plus years. And one thing that was quite interesting, I was studying his books, and simply because when I was doing my master's thesis, I had to study his books because he happens to be one of the main figures and the masterminds of the war on terror. So I had to study a lot of his books on Islam. The main figure that exposed Bernard Lewis was none other than someone that's not even Muslim, Edward Said. Anyhow, one thing that he said the fascination that Muslims have in studying history is what Americans and a lot of Westerners lack. Why are Muslims fascinated with studying history? At least used to be fascinated. Right now, I think we are lacking that. Studying history is studying aqeedah. Pay attention to this one. Studying politics is studying aqeedah. How? Why? Because when you study history, you basically navigate, just like as Winston Churchill had said, another figure that was considered the mastermind, another mastermind of the war on Islam and Muslims. He said the people that don't study history in the past are going to be basically deemed to making the mistake again. That's one thing our Islamic centers are lacking, studying history. We usually think of it as, it's the past, why even study it? It's the past, why is it even important? So we're living in a society that, of course, is so hooked onto technology, which is good, but we had forgotten one piece of ourselves. Your identity is not necessarily what you are now. If you don't know your past, you don't know who you are now. Whether in your health, you need to know your family history. They'll ask you, give me your family history. Why? And even in the dua, we would say, وَجَعَلْهُ الْوَارِثَ مِنَّا. After, اللهم متعنا بأسماعنا أو متعنا بأبصارنا وقواتنا وأسماعنا وجعله الوارث منا أو أبدا ما أحييتنا وجعله الوارث منا, etc. We would make that dua. Ya Allah, give us the ability to have strong sight and strong hearing and strong physical power and basically be healthy, and وَجْعَلْهُ الْوَارِثَ مِنَّا, and let even our children be the ones to inherit good health from us as well. What is happening here? We're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even to make us not only healthy, but let our children inherit our good health from us. We're not just talking about family history in terms of health, but we're also talking about what influences your life, and what influenced your life right now are basically choices that your ancestors had probably taken a long time ago. Whether, my grandfather went to the US in the 50s, and certainly that choice that he had taken at the time in the 50s, it still affects the family until the time of today, or probably even farther. My great-great-grandfather was basically a soldier in the Turkish army. Without us realizing, we still have words. The name was that you see is actually a Turkish word. Hey, people would ask me, what does your name actually mean? And I would say, well, it's a Turkish word. It's my ancestry going back all the way to Turkey. There you go. Without you realizing, it's a name that you carry. It's a name that you carry. It's a word. It's your identity, your appearance. It's your DNA that you carry. Well, that's one side. You don't want to look at your history as just you as an individual, but you also want to study the history of Islam and Muslims, because that's the identity of La ilaha illallah. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling, basically, whether it's the Muslims or whether it's those that want to do the visual thinking, or the visual at least navigation, or whether it's the mental trying to think about all of that, that's what inspired Muslims to keep studying history as part of Aqidah, because the ayat were telling them, you gotta study Aqidah. You gotta study history, because this will basically enhance your deen. And a person without history is a person with no future. If you don't know your history, then you don't know your future, because your future is dependent on a lot of the different things that basically happened in the past, and you looking back is learning the themes and the wisdoms to make sure you don't do any of those mistakes. And two, you basically consider the potentials that about yourself. What potentials did I take from my ancestry? What did we take? And therefore, you recognize the potentials that you didn't necessarily invest in yourself, but there was another investment. You learn how to be thankful to your parents, to your ancestors, to your grandparents. You learn how to embrace the efforts that preceded you. And then therefore, by embracing the efforts, it's not embracing them. Yes, I have this potential, but it's learning how to use it, how it was used, what worked, what didn't work, in what ways I can make it work for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There you go. At the same time, ثم انظروا كيف كان عاقبة المكذبين. I talked about Bernard Lewis, and he was, I forgot to mention what he had said. And he said that Muslims do a better job in learning history, and that a lot of the rhetoric that Muslims engage in khutbah, in probably talking about history, always history is live in their mind. And although he wanted to I guess, presented that this is not always something good, but certainly he was presenting it that if you were to look at Muslims, they would always be talking about how Islamic history was, how one day the Muslims had lived in the past, and how they were being attacked, how the legacy of the prophets happened, etc., in order to say, well, I want you to take the inspiration from the past and basically use that as the inspiration to move forward. Okay, so just keep that one in mind. قُلْ لِمَنْ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, and ask them to whom belongs the heavens and the earth. Let's say right there, لِمَنْ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. He said that this is basically احتجاج عليهم. What is احتجاج عليهم? In other words, this was not necessarily to ask them to answer the question. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wasn't asking them to answer the question because He was letting them process the answer. So it wasn't processing the question as much as it was processing the answer to the question that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted them to say, well, the question is, to whom does the earth and the heavens belong to? And the answer is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted them to navigate, to think deeply, and basically coming in a form of a question. And this is important in teaching children. This is important in teaching basically Islam in general, taking the time, ask him questions, let them think about the answer, come back to me. What did you come up with? How did you come up with that answer? And so forth. And that's also the method that the Quran uses, to let them answer the question in their mind, and based on that answer, come to the other follow-up question. And here's the follow-up question. So if you're asked, well, liman man fis sama, or basically, of course, they're being asked, that is the disbelievers, to whom does the earth and the heavens belong to? That's the question. Well, the answer is, well, they're going to say Allah. So then the follow-up question, well, doesn't the one that you would consider as the creator basically deserve to be called the one to be worshipped as well? So that's that inference and the follow-up question that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted them to answer. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, قُلْ لِلَّهِ, then say it's for the Lord Almighty. Did he say what their response was? No, he didn't say what their response was. At least in this ayah. In other places, it did say, فَسَيَقُولُونَ لِلَّهِ. They're going to say it's for Allah. What was that for? In other words, in other ayat, it did say what they were saying, that it was for God and that belongs to God. It's like, okay, so you recognize that it belongs to God. But why didn't it say فَسَيَقُولُونَ لِلَّهِ, and here it said قُلْ لِلَّهِ? Because not always would you see the ayat coming in with the same pattern, because they will have different responses, but what matters is the response that you would teach others. It's not always important to what they would say and how to say and what they were saying, but it's learning how to respond and make that affirmation even when others are living in denial. قُلْ لِلَّهِ. Say it to Allah. كَتَبَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الرَّحْمَةِ. What is كَتَبَ? كَتَبَ means that he had written. But in this context, it would mean that he had decreed mercy upon himself. How does he decree mercy upon himself? Decree mercy upon himself? In other words, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made it as an ordain, as a decree, as a matter that is the default, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically always Rahim, except in situations لا يجمعنكم إلى يوم القيامة لا ريب فيه. And yes, he decreed that he is merciful, but he had also decreed, look at this one. So كتب على نفسه الرحمة, and with this word, this root is جمع. This is the root, ja and ma and a. All the other letters, lam, ya, noon, kaf, mim. Remember this phrase in Lugha Arabiya? It's basically the default rule in Lugha Arabiya. الزيادة في المباني زيادة في المعاني. Every increase onto the root of the verb or the word basically is an increase in the meaning. So when we say la, that is more of an oath. Ya, is basically telling us in the future. This noon is an affirmation. It's called the tawkid. Kum is basically right there, the pronoun involving all people would be gathered on a judgment day. So this is la yajma'annakum, and it means by Allah, He will gather you all on judgment day. This word la yajma'annakum is basically translated in one sentence. And that's the magnificence in اللغة العربية. In very short words, in very short letters, it would basically give you a whole sentence without going in lots of wording. It would basically give you certain letters, conjugated words, and you would see the root, the etymology, and all of that. And then this build up on the words is basically giving you all those meanings. That's the magnificence of العربية. إلى يوم القيامة. إلى, does that mean to something or on to something? Okay, so إلى يوم القيامة لا ريب فيه. There's no doubt. There's no doubt that such a day would basically happen. Okay, let's see. Well, what is العاقبة? Okay, العاقبة المكذبين, we mentioned that one. Hold on, let's see. Here we go. Okay, let's see. So why did the ayah focus on قل كتب على نفسه الرحمة? Let's just see that one and see what al-Qurtubi said. He said in Sahih Muslim that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had that the Prophet ﷺ had said, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created the people, He basically decreed upon Himself, and this decree is basically in a tablet, in something that is written basically, and this is the quote, Inna rahmati taghlibu ghadabi. My mercy exceeds and overcomes my anger. So this is taghlibu, means to overcome, to exceed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's anger. لا يجمعنكم, this lam, noon al-tawkid, we just broke that down in just a few minutes ago, so I'm not going to be commenting on it too much. Yutindi, you want, wa alaikum assalam, Yutindi. Okay. Let's, sorry. Okay. Oh dear. Okay, here we go. لا ريب فيه لا شك فيه. There's no doubt on that day. الذين خسروا أنفسهم فهم لا يؤمنون. Wait a minute. Those that had lost themselves? What does it mean that they had lost themselves? Why lost themselves? Lost themselves because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them the potential, gave them the privilege to live, gave them all these privileges of rizq, privileges of probably power, privileges of probably making family, probably living the time, all of that. That was supposed to be the privilege. That's why we started out the surah with Alhamdulillah. You had all the privilege. Since Alhamdulillah, and letting you know all the privilege, but you didn't use that. You didn't use that for basically getting to the main success, which is al-akhirah. That's khasiru anfusahum. That's what it means, that they have lost themselves. Fahum. I want to look at this fa right there. He said this fa is basically to mean it carries within it the inference of condition and al-jaza. What is al-jaza? Al-jaza, so this is a condition, and then later on, therefore, the consequence would basically be فَهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. The consequence would be that, well, at least the first transition is that they're not going to be believing. Why? If they had basically doubted يوم القيامة. So what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen? وَلَهُ مَا سَكَنَ فِي اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. At the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Him basically is something, everything that is in a state of sukoon. We talked about that. Okay, let's see. And it was said, I want you to look at the word qila, because qila in Lugha Arabiya means it was mentioned. But here's one thing. When we use this word, qila, that's an indication that the author, and in our situation, that's al-Qurtubi, that al-Qurtubi doesn't necessarily embrace this interpretation fully, but he was generous enough to mention this tafsir because it's a possibility, but al-Qurtubi himself doesn't fully agree with this interpretation. That's why he would use what is called صيغة التضعيف. What is صيغة التضعيف? صيغة means phrase, okay? التضعيف means not to make skinny, nothing's dieting here, but التضعيف means that it's in a place of skepticism, okay? So here he basically said, well, it was said that this ayah was revealed because they had said علمنا أنه ما يحملك على أن تفعل إلا الحاجة. They said, well, we just know that the main reason why you're bringing up this mission about Islam is because you have some kind of an interest. So they basically wanted to accuse him that it's not the message that is motivating him to basically give dawah, but that he's aiming at some kind of an interest. So they offered to basically gather a lot of money and that he would be rich, the richest one out of them. And that way, they will guarantee that the Prophet ﷺ is going to stop giving dawah. Well, that's when they thought, with their wrong estimation and their wrong understanding, that the Prophet ﷺ was somehow seeking to get some kind of a social authority, economical prosperity, and all of that. And then they said, well, we'll give you all the money that you need. We'll offer you wives. We'll give you whatever you want. Just stop doing the dawah because it's harming our religious tourism that comes to Mecca. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, وَلَهُ مَا سَكَنَ فِي اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. Everything belongs that is in a state of sukoon to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout the day and throughout the night. But here's one thing. The word sakana, sakana. Let's see what al-Qurtubi agrees and disagrees in the word sakana. Al-Qurtubi said, well, the word sakana actually means everything that is in a state of being subtle. Subtle. Like what? By the way, when you look at the mindset, remember earlier we were talking about, this is a little off topic, okay? Just look at this one. I was listening to this lecture yesterday about the psychology in understanding politics, comparing East and West. In the word strategy and in the word dawla or dula, and in the approach comparing West to the Muslim mindset. It's quite interesting. Never, ever did this cross my mind, except, of course, it was a lecture by Waddah Khanfar that brought it up, and I was like, never thought about it that way. The word state in English basically means the situation that this current situation is in. But in Lugha Arabiya, we don't consider, or at least in Islam, in the mindset, and even in Lugha Arabiya, we don't consider it as a state, as the current situation. Every single word basically has an etymology, or at least a shared word with another word, and it basically creates a certain vision. So a state is assuming that this is the best it can be in, and this is basically the current and the best situation it could be in. But in Lugha Arabiya, no. It's called dawla. The word dawla means more giving the inference of a transition to something. It's not stagnant. That's not a final state, but it's basically transitioning into this because this is not the end. There's more to transition. That's the difference between the word dawla, and that's why كي لا تكون دولة بين الأغنياء منكم in Surah, in the ayah. Why? Because it was saying so that the money would not be stagnant within you, but there would be the wealth basically circulating within the society. Now, when you look at dawla and you look at history, Islam was giving us the inspiration to see that the situation that you are in is not a state, it's not final, but it's actually going to be transitioning into a new state, into a new situation, into more and many situations. Therefore, how do you invest in this transition? Where do you take it next? And therefore, you would recognize that you too are not going to be in this final situation. You would see it as an evolution to continue throughout the time, and you basically would have to invest in that. Now, the word sakana is
So,
yep, go ahead.
so no Malakiya, supposed to be Jumhuriya.
No Malakiya. So you're saying no monarchy and it's supposed to be Jumhuriya.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Jumhuriya is Republican. But here's one thing. No, it's neither. Let me explain to you why.
Okay.
Because in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically let us see that just as in history, we see that kings, the centricity around a human being is a form of injustice. And that's not the only form of injustice, but the centricity around whether it's an individual or human beings, both are a kind of paganism. Both are a kind of paganism. The only way out of this wrong state, in other words, paganism is not only in one way. It's not only to worship an idol and all of that. And you want to remember that in Islam, idolatry, worship is not only in ritual, but it's also in what you apply in life. And that's why what in the deen for what? For lillah. And what does a deen involve? A deen doesn't involve in what you believe about God and deity and all of that. But no, it involves how do you define justice? How do you define what makes the right relationship between people and the dynamic of justice and basically how the relationships are organized, because it's all about justice. والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان رب العالمين الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بالحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, well, right there. Ar-Rahman علم القرآن. He taught you the Quran. Why? Because الشمس والقمر بحسبان, because just as you would see the magnificent world where whether it's in the galaxies right there, the moon and the skies and everything is basically going in a certain motion. Well, not only up there, but even down there, النجم والشجر, those trees that would grow on earth, and the plants that would grow on earth, in other words, basically on ground, or whether it's going up. Everything is basically going in a certain law. What about it? Then what? وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفْعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ. There's a certain rule, whether in the heavens or on earth. There are certain structures that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. You cannot go beyond it. You cannot exceed it. And that's why he said, وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفْعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ. And that's the same thing. When you look at, since you brought it up, the monarchy or republican or republic, are we going to be basically letting people rule, or is it a particular person ruling? It's neither. It's not a particular person that is a king or whatever, and it's also not the people ruling. The rule is basically for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So what's supposed to be named?
Shura. It's based on Shura. And it's not
any country?
Any country, dawla?
Huh?
It's a dawla. Where you want to call that dawla, you want to call that dawla khilafa, you want to call that dawla basically just a dawla. It doesn't matter what it's called. At the end, it has to, the details, the function of it must be within a dawla. Within that dawla, they recognize that your duty is basically to apply Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rule. Your duty is to apply the details of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already ordained, that's what makes justice. All right? That's a dawla.
Jazakallah.
Okay. So Islam is about freeing. Remember yesterday when we talked about Rabi ibn Amir? Islam is about freeing people from worshiping people, whether it's worshiping themselves or whether it's worshiping okay, I'm confused. Whether it's worshiping yourself or whether it's worshiping other people, or whether it's worshiping a king or whatever it is. What is worship? Worship is not necessarily to be in actual worship, meaning ritual. But worship could also mean that they would be the ones to decree matter. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, no, a deen must be only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what Islam is all about. Okay, now let's look at this one. وَلَهُ مَا سَكَنَ فِي اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. What is second? A second is basically when something is in a state of sukoon, state of tranquility. And that's why we would say, is sukoon your home? And I did a lecture, it was called How to Make Our Houses Homes. And Islam was always emphasizing on how to make those houses as homes, and what is the way to make the house as a home, as a place that the husband, the wife, the children are finding tranquility and basically finding that calmness in. The calmness where they're understanding one another, they're basically sharing a place, they're basically using it in order to grow in their education, grow in their in their commitment, basically to make the world a better place, whether it's in the legacy of the prophets or whether it's applying justice and so forth. Okay,
Dr.
so
Aisha,
yes, ma'am.
you know, subhanAllah, I realized that us as sisters, this is our job, you know, as wives and mothers. SubhanAllah, yani.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You could see one of the main reason that homes had lost a sukoon, had lost, I would say houses had lost homes, when the main thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said that he had created Adam, and created his wife to be sakan, to be his place of sakan. What is a sakan? A sakan is something that makes you calm down. And that's one thing I would say. Ladies, be the place of sukoon for the husband. When he comes in, be the place of sukoon. And subhanAllah, traditional families actually made better wives, better husbands, and better children than modern families. Traditional families, the mother was the wife was basically giving the masculinity to the husband, was also coming in and teaching her daughter as well how to respect, how to organize the house, clean the house, be in preparation of what actually makes the home as in a place of sukoon. I go in details with how to make the houses as homes. Check it out, inshallah. You'll be just go how to make houses as homes and search my name, you'll find it there. Okay, so sakana hada'a wastaqarra. It's to make something calm. Hada'a, calm, wastaqar. What is al-istiqrar? Al-istiqrar is basically to be in a state of tranquility. Okay. And he said, wal murad, and what is intended, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَلَهُ مَا سَكَنَ فِي اللَّيْلِ, is this talking about مَا سَكَنَ وَمَا تَحَرَكَ? Is this talking about everything, مَا سَكَنَ meaning everything that is idle and everything that moves? If we're talking about مَا سَكَنَ فِي اللَّيْلِ, that would give the inference that everything that is calm, everything that is idle, and everything that moves is basically belonging to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's say. But again, he uses the word qila. Remember, qila is giving me the inference that he doesn't fully agree with this interpretation, but he still included it within his tafsir, even though he might not fully agree. He said, and he considered, and at least that a certain emphasis in terms of mentioning what is idle was mentioned because it would be more comprehensive to include anything that moves or anything that is idle. Consider that, well, this is to actually say that if something is idle, then therefore the movement for sure, you would all agree what gave that thing to move is basically having some energy. And if there's energy that made it move, then you would recognize the energy in it was by a power. So it's easier for you to recognize that if something is not stagnant and something is not idle, you would usually give the inference that there's a certain power within it. But the reason why this tafsir, at least this wording of tafsir, was saying, well, this is more comprehensive, is to say people would usually think if something is idle, then therefore it's lifeless. But according to this ayah, no, it's not saying that if something is idle, it is lifeless, but it's basically letting us know that idle things and things that move and basically everything belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that there's no running away, nothing goes outside of the ownership of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's see this one. And then he goes to bring another interpretation, and he said, well, this is to say ma sakana is not necessarily another interpretation. Ma sakana is not speaking about whether something is idle or in any motion. In other words, this isn't speaking about motion or any movement, but this is actually to mean ma khalaqa, everything that was created. So he said, ما سكن, if something is dwelling in something, that means it was created, and therefore it would be an inclusive verb or inclusive verb to mean everything that dwells, everything that is in motion, everything that is dwelling in something, and therefore everything that the night and the day touches. If the night and day touches it, whether it's idle or whether it's in a process of movement and motion, at the end, it basically belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, al-Qurtubi didn't fully agree with this interpretation and considered that to think that sakana is basically the antonym of movement, he basically considered that that's not quite true and that's not quite accurate. And he considered bal al-murad al-khalq, and he considered that what the most preponderant interpretation for the word sakana, he said it's not involving motion as much as it's involving everything that was created. And he said, and this is the best of the interpretations. Why? He said, because it's more comprehensive. And he said, لأنه يجمع شتات الأقوال. He said, because that, if we are to say sakana is to mean what was created, he said, well, this would be more comprehensive, and therefore it would include this interpretation, and it would include the other interpretation, whether the interpretation that it's involving motion, or whether it's the interpretation involving creation, or whether it's the interpretation of involving both, or whatever it is. He said, you know, if we were to say just ma sakana to mean everything that was created, then it would be more comprehensive. And we did talk about you know, the interpretation that I guess within the context, and I said, well, if it was talking about ma sakana fil layli wan nahar, it was basically to let us know, just as in the beginning it was telling us how the creation of different things in matter, the creation of human beings, and certainly the causality in what basically resulted from this creation. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, well, even the things that basically would come as not something that you would see as a cause and effect or matter in motion, but it still basically falls under the power and under basically the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. And he is all hearing and all seeing. Why all hearing? Because we would assume if something is in a state of basically, I would say in a state of being idle, okay, that it doesn't have a sound. We would assume only if something is in a state of in a state of having some motion and energy, that's what has and makes a sound. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sings, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ, he's all hearing of everything, whether we're speaking about something appearing that it is not in motion, or whether something is idle, or whether something was created in the comprehensive wording that al-Qurtubi wanted to consider as preponderant. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ, he's still hearing all that motion, all that creation, and basically throughout the night during the calm state of when everything was completely calm, or whether during the times when things are making sounds, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-alim. He's in all knowledge of all of that. Okay, قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَتَّخِذُ وَلِيًّا. And we talked about al-wali, and say, should I take other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as my wali? What is al-wali? Wali is basically the one that I would take as an authority. Wait a minute, so how did we get there? قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَتَّخِذُ وَلِيًّا. How did we get there? So that's basically after saying and laying out the foundation of understanding who God is. Just keep that one in mind. Remember how this ayah was basically laying out قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ ثُمَّ انظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ قُلْ لِمَنْ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ laying out basically through these questionings and laying out basically the thought about the who is God. And then it basically says, قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَتَّخِذُ وَلِيًّا. So now that you come to the conclusion that God is the creator of basically everything that was in the heavens and the earth, and whether it's an idol state or whether it's an emotion state or whether it's the heavens and the earth or whether it's the human being, etc., all those different things that the ayat we're talking about, then it comes to, well, the second state that goes out of the first idea, which is that God is the creator, God is the one that basically is in control of all matter and all the things in idle state or in motion. Then that's what takes us to state 2, which is, well, then why should I take as a wali, as an authority? And this is important, because al-walaya lillah is stemming from the whole idea that I consider Allah as the creator, that I consider Allah as the one that I turn to. So then you would take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as al-wali, as the authority, as the one that you would worship. So what is al-wali? Al-wali could mean one, the one to give you the final decision. Al-wali can be 2, authority. Al-wali could also be the one that you would take as the one to decree a certain matter. Okay, so that's al-wali. فاطر السماوات والأرض. Notice it said فاطري. Why? Because it goes right there, Allah. Okay, فاطر السماوات والأرض. So if he was فاطر السماوات, if he was the creator of the heavens and the earth, that's the first of all thing. And then he was also وهو يطعم ولا يطعم, and he feeds and is not fed. In other words, he also gives the rizq. And I was ordered, so therefore, look at this one. This ayah, man, this ayah will take us into a whole different world. Let's look at it, man. This ayah, that's it. It's going to take me, let's see. Let's look at this ayah. We got to really scrutinize this ayah. Okay, here's the wali. Number 1, فاطر السماوات والأرض. He's the creator of the heavens and the earth. 2, he's basically the one, remember Surah Al-Shura. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala فاطر السماوات والأرض جعلكم من أنفسكم أزواجا ومن الأنعام أزواجا يذرأكم فيه ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. Right?
Mhm.
Remember that ayah in Surah Al-Shura?
Yes.
That there is the law, that there's the law of binary laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, but that law is not applied on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then له مقاليد السماوات والأرض. To him basically belongs all the different rules that make the whole universe function. So here we go. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created matter and he gave the function and basically gave the energy to make it function, but that doesn't apply on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You need food to continue your life, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not need food. You need energy to continue, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of energy. So therefore, now it goes into that other inference. قُلْ إِنِّي أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أَكُونَ أَوَّلَ مَنْ أَسْلَمَ. Then say, and say it loud, be proud. إِنِّي أُمِرْتُ, I was ordered. Why does it say إِنِّي أُمِرْتُ? Why not just say, I had made up my mind and I had chosen to just be Muslim? Because the best ubudiyya is the ubudiyya that also involves submission, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered you to do it. So you're saying, I was ordered by Allah, that is the inference, I was ordered by Allah that I have to submit to him, and I am submitting upon his order. And be what? أن أكون أول من أسلم. To be amongst the first of those that would basically aslam. But wait a minute, let's look into what al-Qurtubi had said in regard to this one. So غير الله أتخذ وليا said al-wali is whether it's the Lord or the one that you would worship, okay, or the one that would basically give you victory. Okay, so in other words, victory is basically the authority and basically the Lord and basically the one that you would turn to for help. That's also al-wali. Al-wali is also the one that you would turn to for help, right? Okay, let's see. فاطر السماوات والأرض. Let's look at that right there. أغير الله أتخذ وليا. And he's saying, well, what that would mean is that as a Muslim, you have to leave any other authority, any other seeking refuge, any other decision making that is outside of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's basically the inference. So if you're saying, well, would I take other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a wali? That's basically teaching the Muslims, when you want to really submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't submit to people. You needed a decision making, you go and you seek it through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, when you seek it through people, people will start identifying you through your weakness. You be strong. That's why he was teaching us. What was the ayah? إنما أشكو بثي وحزني إلى الله. I only complain my sorrow, my sadness, and all the different things to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because I'm not going to let people and allow people to identify me through my weakness. Never let people identify you through your weakness. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, قُلْ أغير الله أتخذ وليا. قُلْ. قُلْ. Every single time. Say it. I want you to say it. Repeat it. Tell it to yourself. Tell it to others. I want you to live it as an identity. We're not talking about arrogance here, because arrogance will not get you into Jannah. But this is to have complete humility for the sake of the Lord Almighty. And that's why the ayah was saying, وَأُمِرْتُ أَنْ أَكُونَ أَوَّلَ مَنْ أَسْلَمَ. And I was ordered to be the first, among the first that had basically become Muslim. So this isn't to teach the person to be in an arrogant state.
It's عقيدة.
Absolutely. It's to learn how to be humble.
عقيدة الولاء والبراء.
Absolutely. It's to learn how to be humble for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and don't whatsoever think that you're the one that gives the rizq.
حياك الله.
Let's look at right here with yut'am and yut'am. You know, it's quite interesting. He said there are different qira'at. Yut'am and yut'am. He's basically said that's basically a good qira'ah, okay? And what that means, okay, what's the difference between yut'am and yut'am? Yut'am, he feeds others. Yut'am, he is fed. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fed? No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not fed. Let's see, in another qira'ah, yut'im, so not yut'am, yut'im, okay? Inna Allah yut'imu ibadahu. Okay, in another qira'ah, here it is. يطعم بضم الياء وكسر العين. يطعم, and okay, so basically that one. Or بفتح العين. Okay, we mentioned that one. Okay, so basically just the idea is really the same. So ولا وهو يطعم, and here قرئ بفتح الياء والعين. يطعم. Okay, where we will go. Okay, let's see. قل إني أمرت أن أكون أول من أسلم. There comes that final testimony. أي أستسلم لأمر الله. I would submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His orders. And then he said, وَقِيل. Here's that qeel again. And basically giving me the inference that he doesn't fully agree with that interpretation. And he said, it basically means I'm basically the first to have the sincerity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. From what? Me considering that my people are basically as on top, but no. I put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as my number one. وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. And I want you to look at this one. It's quite interesting. وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. You know, this is important. Why? Let me explain this one for a bit. You know, the Prophet ﷺ actually said in a hadith, he said, من تشبه بقوم فهو منهم. Whoever imitates any group of people, he's part of them. I'm asked this question a lot on the ruling of piercing. Okay? If I were to answer the question on the ruling of piercing and just say, well, you're just beautifying yourself and that's basically it. The answer is missing out on a key thing within this whole question. And what is that? The motive. Who are you trying to fit in with? What are you trying to imitate? Why are you doing this? This is key in the answer to the question, why are you doing this? Islam wanted you to be a person that is independent from being a mob and just doing what other people are doing. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Don't be a part of them. In other words, you got to isolate yourself from a certain community. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَهْجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا. There are certain communities you just have to isolate yourself from. وَهْجُرْهُمْ. What is al-hajr? Al-hajr is to boycott. Al-hajr is to isolate. هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا. In a nice way, in a good way. We're not telling you to attack them, but we're telling you that you have to sometimes just tell yourself, I don't belong part of this community. That's not me. وَهْجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا. There are certain people you should not be a part of. And then he says, وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. And don't be amongst the mushrikeen. You just don't belong in there. Why? Because your vision in life is completely different. What you aim for is completely different. And since your aim is akhirah, then certainly the way to get to the akhirah is completely different. Their goal is different, and certainly their life and the terms that they live their life based on is completely different. So therefore, وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to stop right here, at least for this one, and inshallah we'll do Hisn al-Muslim in a couple minutes. How about that?
Good, great. But I have
Okay,
a question before we
yeah,
leave.
go ahead, dear.
Inshallah. Does this ayah, which is number, let's talk about إني أمرت أن أكون أول من أسلم ولا تكونن من المشركين. Does it represent the dialogue between Ibrahim عليه السلام and his father? ولا تكونن المشركين.
Absolutely.
Then after that he said قل إني أخاف إن عصيت ربي عذاب يوم عظيم blah 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 إلى آخره.
Absolutely. It represents that because Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is always, every story that you would see in the Quran when it resembles Tawheed, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is the most important figure that would always resemble the best way of practicing Tawheed and submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, always. That's why in Salah, we would say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is always present in how he was the best to demonstrate how Tawheed is done and how we live the sacrifice. In every single position in our life to basically announce it in our highest, in the strongest words, La ilaha illallah. Okay. There's nothing. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is actually, I wish I can just go in depth in speaking about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Maybe one day we'll probably do the stories of the prophets, but Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, you can never end in speaking about the lessons that we learned from Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Just thinking about him, I'm trying to summarize and trying to, and the ideas are just coming to me racing about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam.
Ya Allah. Ya
It's
Allah.
you know,
Yeah, yeah.
the ideas are just racing right now, and I don't want to start because trust me, I'll never finish. But I would, the most important word that was used in the Quran that I can never go past it is the word awahun halim.
Allah.
I could never go past that word.
Allah.
Never
Yes,
go
yes,
past
yes.
it.
And I remember that from the other
Yep.
tafseer.
Yep.
SubhanAllah.
When we talked about awah,
Allah.
his tears have a sound. You know, how do you have a sound for tears? It's awahun halim. You know, his khushu' would be in sound. He would be crying, but his tears, his khushu' would just have a sound of fear, trembling, halim. Because to him, it wasn't dunya that mattered to him. He would just forgive. He would just dismiss, and that was Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam.
Halim, is this deep patient?
No, al-hilm is forbearance. Yeah, I mean, it's not
Look
deep
like
patience. It's more giving people, dismissing people, even when they wrong you.
this come from the الحلم والأنا لأن ده حديث
Absolutely.
حليم.
Right. So
Not
halim.
get nervous quickly, same like me.
No,
Okay.
no, getting nervous quickly, that's an impulsive. That's being impulsive. That's different.
Not
Okay.
حليم.
Now,
I have no
الحلم.
حلم لكن حلم and صبر حلم that
So
but
الحلم is more relating to people's, people's, I guess,
because you use it
harm.
in our slang حلمك علينا حلمك.
Right. I mean,
صبرك.
yes. Yeah, it does contain with it, but الحلم is more forbearance. You're giving, you're putting in that, you're putting in that, I guess, patience on people. You're dismissing when they wrong you, when they harm you, and you just let go. Why? Well, why do you let go? You're not letting go because you're weak
Yeah.
to retaliate. You're letting go
Because
because what you seek is not feeding your ego, but what you seek is basically the akhirah. You're seeking the reward. You're like, you know what? I'll dismiss it, and it doesn't matter what they had done, because what matters to you is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you value.
Yeah.
That's what the value you're seeking. We usually think if I were to devalue someone, that it gives me value. And that's why people would use derogatory words. You're stupid, you're dumb, you're dead. By thinking that if I devalue you, that somehow the value grows in me. That's how we would think of it. All right. But a believer does not see that. A believer does not say by devaluing someone that somehow you're gaining value. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching us that no, what gives you value is when you let the other person grow in value. You dismiss their sin. You dismiss their harm. That's how you grow in value. Why? Because you went far beyond your anger to embracing principle instead.
اللهم اجعلنا منهم يا رب.
You went beyond anger, beyond emotion, to embracing principle. That's amazing. I could never stop talking about Prophet Ibrahim.
Okay. Are you finished? This ayah you mentioned something about الحلم الجميل. صبرا جميلة يعني sorry صبرا جميلة. Can we invest this ayah in our life as to know if I use حلم جميل or not, or صبر جميل? If I see a group of sisters with hijab, but in a public place, public garden, with their shisha. How can I practice الصبر الجميل, or what can I
So
do?
it depends. First of all, it depends on the authority that you have to stop, for example, this. And whenever you're doing الأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر, ordering for what is good, forbidding what is bad, that is going to be conditional that it doesn't bring bigger harm. Okay? And there has to be wisdom in how I stop this. Because you want to put in context, for example, the Prophet ﷺ, was he seeing kufr in Mecca? He was seeing kufr in Mecca. Was he seeing the idols there? Yes, he was. Well, why didn't he just, I don't know, get an axe and just smash everything? Because smashing everything wasn't going to take out idolatry from their hearts. What was more important than the actual idol there was removing it from the inside. If you manage to remove it from the inside, then you're going to remove it from the outside. They'll be the ones to remove it from the outside. So that's why I would always say, if you want to reach out in da'wah to winning the people, you first have to win their hearts. There's no way. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ told the Sayyidah Aisha, he said, if the first ayat were revealed in the Quran, do not steal, do not commit zina, then the people would have said, you know what, that's exactly what we're going to do. Because they would think that to keep them stronger is to engage in haram. So he said the first thing that was revealed, ayatun min al-mufassal. So the first ayat that were revealed were basically ayat that relate to aqidah, that relate to Surah Fussilat, Surah Shura, so ayatun, different ayat that relate to basically building the inside of their understanding of what is life all about, where you're going, where you're supposed to be. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of everything, then therefore he would be the one that you would turn to as the wali. He would turn to, and he would be the one that would determine the purpose behind this existence. If he was the one that created existence, then he would be the one that would have the right to determine what this existence was created for. Then I would have to follow and trace what that determination and what that purpose is. Because then I would know, well, if he's the creator of everything, then there's no way that I could just deny or dismiss the purpose that he had created it for. Then it means it was created for a reason, and I have to put it within the area that it was created for. When you look at that, you basically just say Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam and how he lived his life to displaying this tawheed. And that's why in Surah al-Mumtahina, what does he say? قل آمنت بما أنزل الله منك وأمرت لأعدل بين no, that's Surah al-Shura. In Surah al-Mumtahina, what does he say? Ya Allah, I lost it. Go to Surah al-Mumtahina really quick, right? But Surah, here we go, Surah al-Talaq. Let's go to Surah al-Mumtahina really quick and actually see it, right? Because in Surah al-Mumtahina, it really, here we go. So what happens? Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. قد كانت لكم أسوة حسنة في إبراهيم والذين معه إذ قالوا لقومهم إنا براء منكم ومما تعبدون من دون الله كفرنا بكم وبدا بيننا وبينكم العداوة والبغضاء أبدا حتى تؤمنوا بالله وحده إلا قول إبراهيم لأبيه لأستغفرن لك وما أملك لك من الله من شيء ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك أنبنا وإليك المصير ربنا لا تجعلنا فتنة الذين كفروا واغفر لنا ربنا إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. يا سلام. What is what is this ayah saying? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically demonstrating here the best example. He said the uswatun hasana, like the best example, with Ibrahim and the group that was with him. When they had told their people, we are innocent of you and what you worship outside of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We had turned away from you, in other words, disbelieved in you. And there's certainly between us and you nothing but animosity and hate. We're enemies to one another. Why enemies to one another? Why not just be inclusive? Well, that's because they had told them the truth, but then they basically had put Ibrahim and الذين معه, they basically threw them in the fire. They basically started torturing them, etc. So now that basically came to the final the final conclusion is that, you know what? That's it. You still continue to insist that you want to be enemies to us. Well, then we're going to be enemies to you as well. And until you believe in Allah Almighty alone. And you would see Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam telling his father, I will ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive you. And I have no power to, in other words, to give you support other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam lives this vocation. رَبَّنَا عَلَيْكَ تَوَكَّلْنَا. Ya Allah, we depend on you. وَإِلَيْكَ أَنَبْنَا. And we submit to you. رَبَّنَا لَا تَجْعَلْنَا فِتْنَةً لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Ya Allah, don't make us a trial, and in other words, to bring the disbelievers into any form of deception. وَاغْفِرْ لَنَا. And forgive our sins. For you are al-Aziz al-Hakim. For you are al-Aziz, the one that is self-efficient and most wise.
Does it mean same ولا تجعلنا فتنة, يعني the bad example in Islam towards
anyway, whether we're a bad example or whether we probably delude others without us realizing, sometimes you try to make da'wah, but instead of making da'wah, you basically end up getting people more distant. That's a fitna.
Yeah, so the
You're
best
trying to do da'wah, but then your da'wah goes wrong and it basically scares people away.
Yeah, but so the best way, and when I see a munkar in a public place, I go to the third stage of تغيير المنكر, as the Prophet ﷺ said, بالقلب وذلك أضعف الإيمان. That means by dua for them.
No, if you're not, you wouldn't go for the last resort.
Yeah, because first one I can't. Second one I make them like.
Right. If you're able, let's say you own the store and you put a policy that in the store we cannot have shisha, for example. This is the store policy. Okay. Or no gambling. This is our store policy. You could do that. Then you're in a state of power. This is your store policy. You're the business lady there. You've got a policy in your store, and this is what it is. And you have the power to basically say, hey, I have this policy. Sorry, if you don't want to comply with our policies, you need to leave. Escort them. You need to leave. Okay. But if, let's say you were a customer, just like everybody else, you're not the store owner, but just like everybody else, you basically were there, and maybe perhaps because you're an older woman, they'll probably give you that respect. It's completely different than probably a teenager approaching those girls. They might actually act out on her, but since it's an older woman, they'll give her the respect that she's like our mom. She's trying to give us, a nice compliment or a nice probably da'wah right there. So thank you, and they'll probably tell you thank you. Maybe they won't necessarily agree with everything, but they'll just be, I guess, nice in the way that they might actually take your words, okay? And you're probably giving them a good compliment. You guys, mashallah, you're doing great, and holding your hijab and wearing your hijab. Maybe you want to add on to it in the right practice. So here it is, I'm putting in a compliment and putting in, I guess, an encouragement and trying to reach out to their heart, etc. And let's say we're doing hey, if I were to come in, these girls might actually lash out on me in this place. I'll just, Ya Rabbi, this is munkar la yurdik. That's all I could say. Ya Allah, this is not something that you would be content of, and you just basically did this within your heart, or you're probably saying it on your tongue. You couldn't do more. That's the last resort.
This is the third stage. So I mean that make dua for them, because they are
Absolutely.
a public place, public park, and this are surrounded by non-Muslim. يعني as a role model, not good for other Muslimin.
Well, absolutely. So, it's unfortunately, that's why we would make the dua, رَبَّنَا لَا تَجْعَلْنَا فِتْنَةً لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, we could see a lot of Muslims, whether it's,
right.
you could see their garbage is in all around the house, and, the place is just looking
right.
like a mess. And even when they speak of ignorance, they're swearing and all of that. And it's like, you're not bringing in a good demonstration for the image, the Muslim image whatsoever. They become fitna للذين كفروا.
Jazakallahu khairan. Barakallahu biki. Sorry, I took your rest minutes.
That's okay. So, I think we'll do تحسن المسلم inshallah tomorrow. Inshallah. Let's end right here. لقد كان لكم فيهم أسوة حسنة لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر ومن يتولى فإن الله هو الغني الحميد. Ya Allah, I can go on with this surah. Ya salam.
Yes, الممتحنة.
Exactly.
Not الأنعام. Yeah. MashaAllah.
Yep, this is, yep. So this is الممتحنة. So inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت.
بارك الله بعلمك. ما شاء الله.